Right. So, you're a bass player. This is going to be more for maybe newer bass players or people who are not kind of used to bass or who are new to it. Or maybe you've been playing for a while and you just never looked into, the topic of pickups, their importance, um, what different types of pickups do. So the first time we went to buy a bass, we just sort of said, "Yeah, I just want a bass guitar." Nobody asked us about, what type of bass we're looking for. They just pointed to one and said, "These are really good," and it was a Squire, and it was a PJ configuration, which means it was a precision and jazz. So that's two different types of pickups or two different pickup configurations. So we just bought it. Um, and in hindsight, though it did sound pretty nice, um, had I known, that's not what I would have gone for. I'd have tried out a few different things, and we paid quite a bit of money for it as well, overpriced. But yeah, for those of you that want to know about pickups, you want to learn about the different types. Maybe you're considering buying a new bass, and you're thinking, well, what do I go for? I'm going to go through the most common bass pickups that you have. There is some crazy stuff out there, and there's some very obscure stuff out there, but I'm not going to cover that right now. I'm just going to go over the most common ones you'd find in a shop or on most bass guitars that are around. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the precision bass pickup. And that's what you're looking at on the screen right now. I'm just making sure this is definitely recording. Yep, it is. Okay, cool. So the P bass pickup, or the precision bass pickup, consists of two separate components or two separate pickups, and you can see them there on the screen. That's actually just one pickup configuration, and the reason why that's the case is, sorry, the first pickup, let's just call this one the first one, will be dedicated to two strings if it's on a 4-string bass guitar, and the second pickup will be dedicated to the other two strings. So, because of the way they're placed, one after the other, the strings would sort of pass across, generally in between these two poles, these two slots. So the strings will just sit in between like that. And when you pluck the string, when you make the string vibrate, whichever string you pick up, whichever string you move, these pickups will pick up that vibration and convert that into an electrical current. And I'll explain a little bit about how that works in a moment. Convert that into electrical current, send it to your jack port, pick up any sound configuration you have, so i.e. how loud of the volume you have on your pots, and what sort of EQ setting you have. Send that out through your jack, through your cable, to wherever it's going. Now, this is not the very, very first configuration, this particular one we're looking at. There was a P bass or a precision bass pickup configuration that was there before this one. But earlier on I mentioned there are some obscure ones which you can't really just walk into a shop and buy that particular P bass that existed then. And if you do find one, particularly an original one, they're very, very expensive. So there's no point in us talking about, guitars you're not going to be able to, A, walk into a shop and pick up, B, depending on how much you make, unlikely to be able to afford, and it's almost always going to be, in fact, it's pretty much almost always going to be secondhand if it's an original. But this is the traditional P bass. This is what everybody knows. Now, the P bass, in terms of the kind of output or the sound it produces, it has two pots on it, And these are the knobs that you see the bass player playing around with when they're playing. The first one is for volume. So it just increases and decreases the level of volume. The second one is for the tone. And what that does is it allows you to change the tone between a very deep bass to a very light treble sounding bass. So if you don't want too much depth in there and you want to, as they say, cut through the mix, you'll go for more treble. It's more cleaner, it's more lighter, and it can cut through the mix better, so you can be heard more clearer. Whereas the more deeper growl can be a bit muddy, but is brilliant for different styles of music. So if you're playing some reggaeton or some reggae music, you really want to have that warm, deep sound. You're gonna want more bass. And then if you're playing something like a ballad or something, something that you need to cut through the mix on, you're going to opt for a bit more treble. If you're going to go for a bit of slap, you want your strings to pop when you pluck them, then you're going to lean towards the treble side. And that's pretty much a P-bass. P-bass is very basic in their setup, so you'll tend to find a lot of P-bass players, particularly if you're looking to buy a P-bass, they'll tend to have a lot of outboard gear, so they'll tend to buy a lot of pedals and stuff like that to get different sounds out of their bass. The P-bass itself doesn't have a massive range in terms of the sounds that it can output, because it's only got that one tone pot. However, throughout history, you'll find from the inception of when it was built up until now, whatever the range it has been sufficient in a lot of Western pop culture music. And it's a very clean, precise range. So if you were to take, in fact, most times when you're going to a studio, they would prefer you play a P-bass. Now, there's a lot of arguments around, why the P-bass is better. For those that only play bass or you only play one instrument, you probably just say the P-bass is the best. But if you do production as well, and you do various other things, and you actually understand, how the sound frequencies are moving, etc., you'll actually realize that actually there's a little more to this than just the fact that it sounds really, really good in a mix once it's been mixed, and sometimes even before it's been mixed. But generally, it tends to sound really good after it's had a mix engineer go through it because of its limited range. So if that's the kind of work you're going to be doing, and you're going to be doing a lot of studio work, then you probably want to pick up a precision bass, because that's what's going to be the most preferred. And it's got some really nice tones to it, albeit they be limited, some really good tones. So that's what you're sort of thinking about with the P-bass. They always say it's best to have one. Now, I own two. I sold one, and I'm building one right now as we speak as well. So once that's fully built, I will have 3 P basses, precision basses. And I've only ever built precision basses, even though the precision bass is probably not my most favorite. It's probably my least favorite bass, and it's only on account of the fact that it's got that limited range for the styles of music that I play. Remember, I said for Western pop culture music, the styles of music I play, unfortunately, a P-bass wouldn't really be able to give me the versatility I need. So I tend not to play them. But that doesn't take away from the fact that they really are a good bass. The very first ever bass built would have been a P-bass, electric bass, that is. And like I said, it wasn't probably this configuration you're looking at here. But if you see this configuration on the bass, then that's a precision bass. So that's the P-bass for you, built by a guy called Leo Fender. So if you ever see these bass guitars called Fenders, and people just talk, Fender, it's because not the first electric bass, because he didn't build the first electric bass, but the first most popular electric bass, which he modeled after a design that had been built by somebody else, which wasn't particularly too good. But he perfected the electric bass, and he built it for mass production, and it was sold at a reasonable enough price that people could afford it, and therefore it flooded the markets and it changed the dynamics of how bass was. Bass players didn't have to carry that massive double bass around, that bathtub or that boat, canoe, whatever you want to call it, a big old massive thing. They didn't have to carry those around. They could move around just like a guitarist. That's the P bass for you. Oh yeah, in terms of weight, now I know nowadays you can get them in all sorts of weights, different weights, how heavy they are. But the traditional P bass, the one that's going to give you the better tones, that's going to be more sort of closer to what is being used in the studios or has been used over countless songs throughout history, is a lot heavier because it was modeled after the Strat, I think, which was a popular electric guitar at the time. And it was made from a very, very heavy, very dense wood, which is what gives it its nice warm tone. So though you can get lighter ones, which do sound really good anyway, if you're really looking to go for, a bass that's going to give you, what you're looking for, which is that P bass tone, then you're going to probably be going for the heavier one. So I'm going to move on from the P bass, because we talked about the configuration, we've talked about the uses, we've spoken a bit about, what you'd tend to use it for, how versatile it is, etc. This guy Leo Fender I was talking about, he went on to invent another bass. Change my seating position. And the second bass he went to develop, he wanted it to be different from the P bass he had made. P bass was doing fine at the time. It's not like there was anything wrong necessarily with it, because at the end of the day, when he made the P bass, he also modeled it after the big heavy basses I was just making fun of, the double basses, in the sense that he had 4 strings, those had 4 strings. The strings were tuned to the same E, A, D, G notes, and the reason for that is he wanted to make something that can replace the double bass. So there's no point in building it and making it completely different, because you couldn't just swap one for the other. He was looking to revolutionize the industry for bass. So then we move on to the jazz bass. And as I said, with this bass, he wanted versatility. So he did a lot of things differently. Earlier on, we spoke about how the P bass that you'll tend to find is the most used, or quite heavy, etc. Well, the jazz bass was made to be much lighter. So it's much thinner. The shape of the body is much wider, but it is lighter. So, you can put on a jazz bass and play for hours and hours, and, it's not going to kill your back. Whereas the precision bass, after a while, you see people selling them because they're like, look, this thing it's absolutely destroying me. So they went for the jazz bass. Now, you'll see there's also what looks like the P bass, but these a little bit longer, the pickups. Now, there's actually 2 separate pickups, whereas with the P bass, even though it looked like there was 2, one of them was for 2 strings and the other one was for the other 2 strings on the bass. This is 4 in total on a standard 4-string bass guitar. Yes, you can have a 5, a 6, 7, and however many, but the standard would be 4 in general. And I've seen some 3-string bass guitars before as well. Really nice. But the jazz bass has 2 separate pickups. And one of the things that Leo went for with the jazz bass was versatility. Now, I play a jazz bass. I think I own about 3 as well. Yeah. So I like the jazz bass because of its versatility. And I can take my jazz bass on an event and at least know that if there are different styles of music that I need to cover, the jazz bass can actually handle it. It may not be the best at all the songs, but it can handle versatility. So you can take it for an event where you're doing different styles of music, and you'll still be able to play the bass, and you're not going to get looks from people like, why didn't you bring this type of bass? Whereas if you took the P bass, you might get that look from the drummer or some of the other musicians or the director saying, can we get a bit more of this out of you? And you won't be able to do that. And the reason why there's more versatility on this is these two pickups are different in the sense that, and we're going to talk a bit more about it later on, but they're different in the sense that they both deliver two different sounds. So the pickup that's closest to the neck of the bass is called the neck pickup. It's got more warmer tones, more deeper tones. And naturally, when you're playing your bass, regardless of what pickup configuration you have, if you play your bass closer to the neck, okay, you'll get more warmer tones. If you move even further back towards the bridge, the strings become tighter. You get more thinner nasally tones. They're more raspier, more tighter, more metallic sounding. So, as I mentioned, there are two different pickups. The one closest to the neck gives you the warmer tones. And those warmer tones, like I said, if you want to go for reggae or reggaeton and you'll get more out of your jazz bass. Now, one thing to note is when we spoke about the precision bass is what we call a hum canceller. So those two pickups we saw, even though so those two pickups we saw in the first picture, these two pickups are working in such a way that they cancel out any hum or any noise, because the frequencies cancel each other out. So it's a much more cleaner sounding tone. These have a more thinner sounding tone. And it's a more sort of, I don't want to use the word out of control, but it if you don't know what you're doing with it, the tones can sound very out of control. And that, whilst you may think that's a bad thing, it's actually a good thing, because it's what gives the jazz bass its unique tones. So these thin single coil pickups don't have that hum cancellation. So you'll have the hum and the buzz and the hiss, but it's part of what makes the jazz bass's character. So you can hear things like the fingers plucking against the strings, etc. And you can still hear that with the P bass, but it's more prominent here. But some of those sounds are what make the jazz bass, and some of those sounds are brilliant. There's a guy called Jaco Pastorius. He built an entire career off some of these sounds that, most P bass lovers, fanboys, hate about the jazz. And Jaco Pastorius has gone down to be, if not, in my opinion, and in many bass players' opinions, he's probably the greatest, most definitely one of the greatest, but probably the greatest bass player to ever live. Next to me, of course. So yeah, we talked about the front pickup, the neck pickup. The next pickup is the back pickup, which is, as I said, it's the bridge pickup. It's more thinner in tone. And this is where you get the Jaco sound, because he made his career off that back pickup. It's a really, really thin, nasally sound, but it's got a bit of a rasp to it. And there's a lot more control back there in terms of sound, because when you pluck the strings, they don't really go all over the place. They're a lot tighter, more secure back there. So what you do, the reason why this is such a versatile bass is you've got separate volume controls for the two pickups. So you can choose how much of that back pickup you want, that tight nasally tone, and you can blend it in with how much volume you want from the front pickup, which can give you some really warm tones. And the different levels of volume you apply to the different volume pickups is what gives you that endless range of versatility. So though you won't sound exactly like on the front pickup, though you won't sound exactly like a P bass, you can sound close. To the untrained eye, the ear, sorry, not eye, you can fool that ear into thinking it just sounds like any other bass. But to those that are trained, and they'll be like, that's not a P bass. You can probably get better tones or more accurate sounds from a P bass. So whilst the jazz bass won't sound bad, it just won't sound the part in comparison to the P bass. But in the overall mix, they'll still sound good enough, both of them. Some idiot on a bike riding around at nearly midnight. It's lockdown time, so people they need to let off some steam. We'll allow it. So yeah, as I said, the different volume tones you get from the two pickups is what gives you the versatility. So that's the jazz pickup for you. Now there's one more knob or dial on the jazz bass, because this has 3 instead of the traditional 2 on the P bass. And that last one is tone. So whilst you have 2 different pickups that give you 2 different tones, bright, warm, you also have a tone knob as well. So in addition to the different volume blends you get from the 2 different pickups, the front one giving you the warmer, deeper sounds and the back one giving you the tighter, nasally sounds, not only can you do blends of those 2, you also have an overall tone on the actual overall sound of the 2 pickups. You could go for one pickup and turn the volume off on the other and then just work the tone on that one, and vice versa. So you can go for the nasally and then just add a bit more bass and get different sounds you want there, or you can blend the 2. And the fact that it's so versatile, this is where one of the argument comes into play, that the reason why the jazz bass is not wanted by engineers in the studio is because it's so versatile in its sounds that they've gotten so used to the limited range of the P bass, and it is really limited. Unless you're bringing in outboard gear and pedals and all this stuff. But just the bass on its own the P bass has got a very limited range. It's a good range. Leo Fender did his homework, so it's a very good range. But they're used to that. And personally, knowing what I know, I think mix engineers prefer the P bass. It's because they're just used to that range. Whereas if they're introduced to a jazz bass, they're just like, well, I'm not used to this. And my argument is, if you listen to a jazz track, listen to someone like Miles Davis or Marcus Miller or Marcus Stanley or Lee Geddy. These are some of the greatest bass players, Jaco Pastorius. If you listen to their albums and you listen to a Beatles track, okay, Beatles didn't actually use a P bass actually, so again, nobody ever turns around and says, oh, the Beatles were excellent, but their bass sounded horrible. You know what I mean? It sounded good enough. So if we can listen to the Beatles and enjoy and appreciate their music, listen to jazz music, you can't turn around and say that a jazz guitar is not suitable for studio. Because, well, what's wrong with the jazz music out there? Nothing. So this is why I say, if you know a little bit more and you're not sort of ignorant and you're not a fanboy, you just open your eyes, you'll see that it doesn't make sense. You listen to a Marcus Miller CD, it's amazing. And Marcus Miller is one of the, so to say, spokespersons for the Fender jazz bass. He's an amazing, jazz player, bass player. You've got Marcus Stanley, Lee Geddy, and yeah, as I mentioned, if you listen to some of the Beatles tracks, they didn't use P basses on that either. So, what do you have to say about that music? Nobody turns on and says it's terrible. We love the Beatles. So you can't justify an argument to say that the P bass is better in the studio. It's only better with the mix engineer that you have. If the one you have is limited to just mixing on the P bass, then they're really good at that. That's fine. Clap hands for them. But you have other mix engineers who have done really well with other basses and done just as well, if not better, and nobody's complaining. So it's just a simple logic. But both basses are brilliant. As I said, pick the bass because it suits what you need it for, than just going with one just because someone told you this is the better one. Both great. Use them in their environments. I would say if you can get more than one type, get more than one type. I take 2 basses to a gig. And if I need to use the other for any songs, I pick it up and I play it. It's as simple as that. Rather than arguing over which is better, just get them all. They're all better. Now you may find some basses that look like this, where you've got precision pickups in the front, or a precision pickup. These two are just one pickup, and a jazz pickup at the back. And this is sort of a trade-off between the two. And this is the Squire I was talking about that we first initially bought. It's a PJ configuration. So you've got the bridge pickup, which is the one at the back where I said this nasally tones, tighter sound. And then at the front you've got the warmness of a P bass. And like the jazz bass, you'd get the different blends between the two. So you've got a volume for the pickup P bass, separate volume for the jazz pickup, so separate volume for the precision pickup, separate volume for the jazz pickup, and an overall tone. So that now gives you versatility, and it's a blend of the two. So if you had warm and you wanted a bit of snap, then you don't have to pick up a jazz bass. Obviously you don't have the front jazz pickup, okay, but again, this gives you a whole new blend of versatility. And if you love the sound of the P bass, you can always just turn the jazz one off, and you can just have your P bass sound, and yeah, vice versa. So this is a good combination. Let's move on to the next. Now these are either called soap bar or humbuckers. Now this is my preferred type of pickup for 2 reasons. Number one, one of these, so you can have 2 of them on a bass most of the time. You want to find some basses that just have one. One of these, on its own, as you can see, can cancel hum. That's why they're called humbuckers. So you know what the P bass does. The P bass pickups do. However, these don't have the limited range, because each and every one of these, so this line here will have its own wind of copper. Can't even speak now. Copper wire going around, and this line here will have also its own wind. So you've got 2 different winds, and that's what cancels out the hum and the noise and the hiss. So it's a nice, clean sounding bass. But it's also got its own versatility depending on how many winds go around. Now what some manufacturers will do is they'll put in an inbuilt switch that allows you to switch off one of these sides either that side or that side, turning that pickup into a jazz pickup. So you've got more range than a P bass, and you'll have the ability to turn it into a jazz bass if you want to, but you've also got the humbucking when you need it. And if you have two, the one at the back will be wound differently to the one at the front. So you have a situation where you've just got endless clean versatility. But the reason why I love these is, this is the biggest reason why, it's the rasp. You get some serious rasp out of these. It's like a sound in the background as it plays, and I absolutely love it. It's like a cat purring, but in musical sounds, and for certain types of music, my goodness, it does things to you. So that's why I like the humbuckers. I absolutely love them. And I was talking earlier on about the different types of whines that you get, and I'll quickly move on from here. So if you look at this pickup, this obviously is the P bass pickup, and you can see the one that's uncovered, this copper that's going around this these poles that we saw earlier on. These poles. And what I was referring to when I said whines is, when you play a sound, electricity moves through this copper wire. And obviously it's wound around. So the signal has to go around and round and round and round and round and round and round, and then come out on the other end. Okay? Now there's magnets involved and, different other things, but I'm just going to keep this simple. The more whines you have, the further or the longer the current has to remain within that pickup before it gets sent out. Okay? The less the whines have, the less whines you have of copper wire, the shorter the distance it has to travel before it comes out. So if you have more whines, you get sort of warmer tones. If you have less, you get very thinner tones, because there's not much for the current to go around. It just goes in and it comes out. So this is what makes the difference between different manufacturers who manufacture different types of P basses or different types of jazz basses, is because they set the tone of the pickup based on how many whines go around. And some people may play a particular bass and say, yeah, it sounds good, but I wish it was more warmer. And their manufacturers will do that for the exact same type of bass, if it's jazz or precision or whatever. And some people might play it and say, oh, it sounds too muddy. I wish it was lighter sounding. And that again can be for the precision, it could be for the jazz, it could be for the humbuckers. So, or you can have a combination of PJ, and they might say, oh, I want a warmer precision sound, but I want a thinner jazz, or I want a warmer jazz and a thinner precision. So many different options available. So depending on how that pickup has been made, then on top of that, you couple the combination of the, if you've got like a jazz or a PJ combination. And then on top of that, you add the tone, what frequencies they've selected for how deep it goes or how bright it gets. You just have a completely different sounding bass from one to another. So you could have 7 jazz basses lined up. I love the Sire brand. I think it's everything that anyone could ever need for the jazz sires. And I also like the Fender, but I prefer the sire. And the reason why I like the sire is, for my liking, my needs, it's got a lot more rasp. It's got a lot more snap. And it's a lot more versatile. Whereas the Fender Jazz has a sort of safely played signature. Still very versatile, but not as out there. It's got its trademark signature. So if you like that, which is a really, really good signature, by the way, but if you like that sound, then you'd probably prefer to go for that one instead of the other. But as you know, from what you've heard from me, I love versatility. It makes sense to me, because why would you want to take 400 or 500 bass guitars to an event or to a recording where you could just take one and get everything you need out of the one bass? Others may say, well, we like having pedals and being able to make different sounds, distortion, etc. But if you take pedals with a jazz bass, it's a bit more, how can I put it? It's a bit more trickier. But if you take it with a P bass that doesn't already offer a lot, then it's in a more controlled environment. So, yeah, based on this discussion, you can go away and figure out what it is you want, what it is you like. And if you're trialing out a bass in a shop, you can just sort of get there and say, give me your best jazz, your best precision, your best, humbuckers or soap bar pickups. And at least you have a starting point. Then you can then sort of go in and say, okay, I prefer the humbuckers. What do you have in this range? And then they'll come out with the Stingrays and the Music Mans and whatever's. Or you might say jazz and they'll bring out the Fenders and the, what's this company? Ibanez. Or you might say precision and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll get the Fenders out. But at least you kind of know where you're starting from, and which tones you like better, and then you can take it from there. So I'm going to end this video here. If you have any questions, that's what the comments bar is for. Just drop a few questions in there. I'll either get to them or someone else might see your question and answer it for you. But yeah, I hope this helps somebody pick out a bass of their choice. All right, peace.